Hello everyone and welcome back once again to the YouTube audiobook series for The Snake and the Rose. I am Abby Matthies and today I will be reading Chapter 7. If you missed Chapter 6, please go back. I have a link in the description to Chapter 6. And if you are good, then we will continue on with Chapter 7, Subtle Changes.
I opened my eyes yet to another familiar black room. There were yet again no lights and no sounds, just pure blackness. The kind of blackness that still would blind anyone from seeing their own body. I recognized the feeling of paranoia rising in my stomach again from being in the dark. Upon that feeling, I called out once more into the dark abyss I was standing in. Hello? Is anyone there? There was the common moment of silence, when suddenly a spotlight appeared faintly in the distance. I began walking towards it on instinct. Every step that I took led me to the same spot where the two shadowy figures stood confronting each other. The first figure still standing tall and broad, while the other still had its head tilted towards the ground, with its arms wrapped around its chest. Coming upon the edge of the spotlight, I stopped and began to examine each of the two figures again. As usual, they started out having no defined features. They were the same looking mannequins that were meticulously placed the way they were. The first figure was still holding some sort of paper with words that were too blurry to make out. Nothing was different about that. I averted my eyes to look at the second figure as it was holding something against its chest. I began to examine the manila folder that he was holding, expecting to find nothing different. But as I did so, I noticed a label on the tab of the folder. I walked around to the other side of the scene, still standing outside of the light, to get a better look at it. Now examining the label, I could see that it displayed the first name of Damien, but no last name. I reflected a little upon the name and felt a sense of deja vu starting to rise within me. I heard that name recently from somewhere, but I couldn't wrap my head around it, when suddenly I remembered within my reflections that Abby has a friend named Damien. Was this the same Damien? Or was that just a coincidence? As that thought stirred in my head, the figures began to change once more. They gained their human-like features, just like they do every time. The first figure turned into the man with the unusually slender stature, strong jawline, crooked smile, and yellowish-green eyes, along with his hair being slicked back and shiny from the overuse of grease, the patterned button-up navy blue shirt with the gray-blue vest, and the black formal pants. As the first figure was done changing, I started to glare at the second figure as its changes were starting. It was changing into the more muscular man with the black hair that was slightly slicked back. Appearing next was the same red button-up shirt along with a matching black vest and pants that he always wore. I started to look at his face as it began to form its features. I recognized the same pair of glasses he obtained along with the frown and gloomy blue eyes. After the changes had stopped, I still felt an even stronger feeling of deja vu than before. I already felt it from the name Damien, but having it grow stronger while looking at this man was confusing to me. What did this man and I have in common? We were two totally different people. I don't remember ever seeing him in my life. I remember him within this place, but nowhere else. While I was drowning in my thoughts, a heart monitor started to beep faintly while objects started to faintly appear around the two. I couldn't make out everything within the scene. The only objects I could pinpoint were a desk piled with books and a computer, and an X-ray light box with a faded X-ray image on it. As I was observing the environment that was forming, the conversation between the two figures started up.
I can visibly see all your hard work going towards this one patient. It's almost to the point where you're becoming obsessed with it.
The first man said with his cocky tone.
Well, of course I'm obsessed with it. This patient is my only kid, my only offspring. You can't tell me you wouldn't do the same if you were in my position.
The second man confessed, looking up at the first.
Of course I would. We may share the same profession as doctors. However, we don't share the same aspect of having children with cancer.
The second man held out the manila folder in front of him and opened it. As he gazed upon it, I could see that there were loose documents that were stored inside and were paperclipped together. He must have been reading the details about his son's condition. He paused after a moment and quickly closed it to hug it against his chest again. I turned my head back to the first man before he started speaking.
I do have sympathy for you and your situation, so I'm here to make you an offer.
I don't want your offer. I just want my child to have an ordinary life.
The second man said, with a stern voice. I was in shock. This is not his ordinary dialogue that he says. The feeling of hope started to grow inside of me, thinking he was going to make the right choice this time.
I know you want your child to live a long and happy life. No parent wants to see their child die before them. Fortunately, this offer I am giving you will give you the benefit of the doubt and grant that for you. Just hear me out.
A silence rose between the two. I stood there anxious, knowing damn well the first man would just fool the other. I could feel the anger rising in me while the second man was deciding his next move. Before anything else could happen, I decided to call out to him.
Don't fall for his shit!
But suddenly the slender figure snapped his fingers, and a sheet of metal was placed over my mouth, prohibiting me from speaking. I tried to rip it off with my hands, but the metal was already sealed in place. I looked at the first man smiling, while the other one spoke.
What's your offer?
The first man proceeded to give him the piece of paper he had in his hand. The same 4 words appeared in bolded blue ink: cure, cancer, transfer, and work. The second man examined the paper while the other spoke about freeing the other's son from cancer in exchange for himself. The second man glared up in suspicion and confusion like he normally does, and asked what's that supposed to mean, and the vicious cycle of lying continues.
I'm sorry. I can't sign this deal with you.
The second man said, coming to his senses. I stood there wide-eyed and in shock once more as he continued on.
Not that this doesn't sound pleasing or anything, but I like where I work now. The staff is wonderful and I like my patients. I would hate to leave for a different hospital and leave them all behind. They watched me grow and become the wonderful doctor I am today. I can't just let that go.
The second man proceeded to try and hand the contract back to the first, but he did not open his hand to receive it.
You want to help your kid, right? I just told you that I could cure their cancer, no questions asked. You're not just gonna throw away that chance because of some outsiders watching you form into the person you are. Like you said before, this is your only child. It would be stupid of you not to take this reasonable offer.
Another silence rose as the second man pulled the contract towards him again, rethinking his choices and future actions. The first man reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen.
So, do we have a deal?
He said, holding the pen out to the other. I started getting that recognizable repulsive feeling in the pit of my stomach. The second man grabbed the pen and took the cap off. I could still see how hesitant he was to sign the contract. As the man slowly drifted the pen closer to the signature line, the repulsive feeling in my stomach intensified. I looked back to the first man to see his face with that evil smirk on it. The smirk that still haunts me to this day, and I knew that was my cue to stop the madness. I tried to shout at the second man, but forgot that my mouth was covered with that metal sheet. I started to move my legs and began to feel that sudden restraint of the shackled chains. I turned my head around to find the connection where the chains met the floor. I turned my head back to see the second man still edging towards the contract with the pen. I felt the anger overflowing as I was trying to break the chains when suddenly I did. I stumbled forward as the chains broke and regained my balance quickly. I looked at the two men starting to walk towards them, and the first snapped his fingers again. Within an instant, I became shackled once more by my wrists. The chains that held me back were now made of a stronger metal, so I couldn't break them no matter how hard I tried. I frantically looked back at the two men to see the second man had the pen inches away from the line. The first man's eyes started to glow, showing that the deal was almost final. I tried screaming, but all I could hear was my own muffled voice. At that moment, another chain shot out of the ground, shackling my neck, and quickly forced me to the ground until I was stuck on my hands and knees once more. I glared back up to see the second man had once again finished signing the contract. I felt so defeated. I had never gotten this far to saving the man before. I even had a spark of hope for him because he was starting to talk common sense. But why at the last second did he lose it all and fuck up his life? The second man gave the contract back, and the first man began his evil chuckle and laughter. The second man jumped back in horror one final time before the first man spoke his punchline.
You are mine.
And within a snap, the second man disappeared without a trace. I tried to scream and squirm as I was struggling to break free from my bonding chains. The first man turned to me in my misery, with his eyes still glowing. He glared at me with his evil smirk and said one final thing.
Better luck next time, Darius.
He began his evil laughter again, and as it echoed in my head, I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air.
This has been Chapter 7 of The Snake and the Rose by Abby Matthies. Tune into the next video for Chapter 8. Thank you for listening.